Alrighty. Um, all right. Today I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy day to come join us to learn a little bit more about REDCap and some helpful examples that one of my colleagues, Marcelina, is going to present today. As always in these type of presentation meetings, I like to first start off with a few stats just so you can keep abreast on what's going on as far as our REDCap, ITS REDCap stats. Currently, we have approximately 396 active projects, and of those, 163 are in production. The balance of those creative and exciting new projects is 233. We have approximately 454 active users. Just a reminder, active users are defined as users that have logged in the past 365 days. We also have now 12 projects with Mozio enabled. I don't believe I have any Trulio enabled at this point. A couple of reminders as we're getting ready to present. The first one is a reminder on support. We at RCC are responsible for maintaining and administrating all REDCap at FSU. Just want to remind everybody if you have a need for support, that we have the REDCap request portal, which is you get to it by a link like this and the QR code right here. I will say that Alex, I believe, is going to drop the multiple links and QR codes that we talk about today in the chat toward the end of this meeting. We will also, Simi will be sending out emails to include all the QR codes and links for your safe keeping. I want to remind everybody that in RCC, we support all users, like things like user requests, accounts created, one-on-one consulting, technical support if you have issues with REDCap, guidance on project builds and best practices always, and project changes. If you need to move something production or move it back to drafts, you can make some changes or an API request for import export, and also notifications if we're having a downtime or application upgrade. Also, would remind everybody of the trainings that we have available. The link is here regarding the tutorials that are from Vanderbilt themselves. QR code, if you want to grab it now, it certainly will come down your way in the email after this meeting, as well as in the chat at the end of this meeting. Also have our series of previous lunch, learn, and shares. We have them in a safe place in a document in the docs area at this URL. QR code is here if you wish to go ahead and check it out. And then, of course, we've got our self-guided training, which is Canvas course at this URL and this QR code. All right. Another reminder, as always, I always want to pitch the idea if anybody's got any helpful information about your project build or ideas or cool stuff or challenges that you would like to share with our colleagues. We have created a survey at this link, QR code as well, that you can go and offer up to join us in one of our REDCap meetings. Let's see, I think I got another reminder. Oh, only other thing I want to remind everybody that if you would mute yourself until such time that we start doing the QA at the end of the meeting, where you would put in your questions in chat or raise your hand and you'll be unmuted. And of course, if you think of something outside of this meeting, we encourage you to send email to our redcap@fsu.edu. All right, our presentation today is by my colleague and manager, Marcelina, who's joined us today to talk about logic and syntax. within surveys and data forms, as well as form communications. So I will stop sharing and invite Marceline to start sharing and present her good information, helpful information.
Thank you, Mark.
Of course.
Okay, so I'll get started on logic and syntax. So the things that I wanted to talk about today, there's two different components within surveys and data forms, as well as our four datas and survey forms. And this is more about the organization of them as well in terms of what you're going to be able to view. And then lastly, I have four communications where you'll see branching logic and syntax, and then I have a bonus section at the end that talks about advanced branching logic and syntax. So, just a quick overview in terms of background. Depending on the level of experience that you have in REDCap, you'll know that there are data forms and surveys. Our data forms are going to be where your REDCap users are able to enter in data. You can change user rights depending on how you want people in the project themselves to access. And then data forms specifically have an additional feature as opposed to surveys where they can mark complete or incomplete or unverified. When you're seeing your instruments in your REDCap project, they can be both used as a form or as a survey, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how you make a form into a survey and how that gets utilized. So for data forms, our typical use case is when we want data to be entered by staff or it needs like frequent updating, and then you need audit controls and permissions. For creating a survey, when you create a new instrument, it automatically comes up as a data form. To enable it as a survey, you'll have to click this enable button. And that's after you've enabled surveys in the project themselves, in the project setup. This is an example. This green icon is an example of what a instrument is going to look like once it has been enabled as a survey. And then if it's not been enabled as a survey, it'll have this enable button, but won't have any additional survey related options on the side as well. But there also, from what I've shown before, is that there's moments that you want to use data forms and there's moments that you want to use surveys. For surveys, this is the survey view of a data form that you can have a public link or a specific link based on the participant for reporting the data, but they don't necessarily have to have a REDCap user login space. So this is the same data form that we saw earlier, but just in the survey customized space. This is really helpful when you're sending out invitations for survey completion or if you need anonymous survey participation. So, any questions on data forms or surveys, just so that we have a baseline of what we're working with? I will shift this guy over. Perfect. It sounds like everything's been answered so far. So I'll keep moving on. For logic and syntax in surveys and data forms, I'll start off with what is branching logic. We utilize branching logic to hide specific fields in the codebook or as people are participating either in the data form or in the survey space. For example, if a participant does not consent to this study, then we'll remove any screening fields that are available in the same survey, or if a participant is male, we would hide the fields, male at birth, hide the fields asking about pregnancy. So for our branching logic, once we create a field or variable, we'll get this space in our designer space where we can edit the contents of an instrument. And each of the fields will have this icon here where we can set the branching logic. This is different from where we're editing the actual field. So sometimes you'll have to, I flip back and forth constantly to update the branching logic. So When you click on that icon, you'll get this screen here. And you have two different options in terms of how you want to set up your branching logic. You can either use the advanced branching logic syntax, or you can use the drag and drop logic builder. Um, the As it says here, you want to show the field that you've selected only if this logic that's presented in the box is true. So when we're constructing advanced branching logic syntax, we can use the comparison operators greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. If you're familiar with programming languages, this is slightly different across all different programming languages. This is the open caret, and the closed caret is our example of does not equals. And we can also have equals. And this one is typically for, besides equals, these you'll see comparison operators for our multiple choice and our number values. You can use these comparison operators in combination with our Boolean operators and an or. And so if we use only ands, that means when all of the statements are true. And then if we're using or, this is if any of them are true. But we can use those in combination to get the specific criteria that we need to either hide or unhide a specific field. Something to note, though, is that when we're comparing number values, we'll need quotation marks around our number on the right-hand side if we're not using greater than or less than. So for example, if we're using the equals and does not equals specifically. And then the last thing that's slightly different when we're specifying our options for, which we'll get into a little bit later in terms of our example, if we're setting checkbox values, we actually set the checkbox value, like raw value, on the left-hand side instead of the right-hand side. And our equals 1 denotes whether or not the option is checked, and equals 0 is whether it's unchecked. And this is all information that you're going to be able to find if you select this how to use branching logic in this window space. So the other two spaces here talking about smart values or smart variables and special function. When you're typically doing advanced branching logic syntax or you're using the drag and drop logic builder, you can specify only the fields that you've already created within the project. So for example, any variables that you yourself have like edited and added to a instrument. Smart variables are information that aren't in your data fields, but they are within the project themselves. So it could be specified users, record numbers, event number, arm numbers, whether or not you're using a repeating instrument or events. Our special functions are, again, like more complex, I guess, advanced branching logic syntax, talking about if statements. So the conditional that you would usually have just in here to hide or display the actual field, we can set it to here, and then we can set up it's an essential if statement. So if this conditional results as true, this is the true result that gets outputted, and then otherwise the false result gets outputted. Date diff, since we have date variables within REDCap, we can compare either two different date values. Sometimes I've seen this done before where you want to make sure that the last appointment was within 6 months. So you want to make sure that you check the either enrollment date with a date from 6 months ago to make sure that it's true or false. And then there's also this that checks whether or not a field is blank or missing code. And there's additional special functions that are organized by for numbers, for dates, and for text values. When you switch over to the drag and drop logic builder, there's a lot more like selection that you can pick from as opposed to typing and remembering the fields themselves. So you can specify which data collection instrument you want to pull a variable from, and then it lists all of the fields and then their potential values. So if you have a multiple choice, it will give you the label as well as the raw value. So I don't like tea is the raw value of 1, and then 2, and then 3 following for the number of teacups. But if it's something that's more generic and maybe the program doesn't know, REDCap doesn't know what value you need, for participant ID, it says define criteria. So it'll leave it blank for you to fill out what participant ID would need to be there for the field to be hidden or revealed. So when you're in the drag and drop logic builder, you are only using fields that are within the particular project, and you won't be able to utilize our smart variables or our special functions. However, once you select the field choices that you want from other fields and you drop them over to this space, if you switch the toggle back to advanced branching logic syntax, it'll convert it to our advanced branching logic syntax. And then you can add in the smart variables or the special functions if need be. So, this is our example for field branching logic within the field. So, utilizing sex at birth, and then if we have a male selection, we don't want this "Are you pregnant?" question to show up. We only want it to show up if our participant selects female. And how this works is you'll see the branching logic here displayed once we've set it up, and you'll only be able to see the raw value as opposed to the label itself. And this is the view internal to REDCap in the designer space. So this is what it looks like in the designer space. And now if we drop down to what it looks like in the survey space, now that we've not selected anything, we don't see this field because this field only shows up when the female sex at birth selection is selected. So then we have a similar view here in survey. When we select male, it jumps right to the next section, but when we select female, it adds the extra question, "Are you pregnant?" Something to note with this is if you have a field that's required but then is hidden by branching logic, it won't give any errors within the project or in the survey space once you submit complete. It's only required value if the hidden field is revealed. Okay, so in addition to branching logic, we can also utilize stop logic. And for this, what happens is we can select a particular answer that stops the survey from being completed, and we can use this for screening criteria. This is the pop-up that happens when you select this red hand icon, and you can select from this particular question what answer will provide the stop action. This icon does not appear for every single field, unlike branching logic. Branching logic, you'll see that for every single field, but you'll only see stop action for something that has predetermined choice options. So you'll see that for multiple choice, drop downs, and I'm not sure that you see this for checkboxes, but what that looks like in the survey space is when I've selected I'm not interested in the survey and I have a stop action triggered for that. This is the pop-up that shows up. Sometimes we run into this issue if people want to utilize stop logic for screening criteria that participants can return and edit the response and select one that would let them continue the survey. So branching logic is our alternative to using stop logic. So that way you can determine that criteria, but the participant themselves don't have any indication whether or not they've passed or failed the criteria for a study for them to change their answer and then give maybe false information. To continue on our thought process for stop logic, in our survey settings, we have the option to retain the survey responses even if the stop action is triggered, which is the default, but you can also change this so you remove any survey responses if the stop action is triggered. So that way you're not retaining any data that might not be relevant to your study. You can also alternatively have a survey completion text option instead of the standard survey text completion. which will show up when you click on End Survey. In survey settings, we also have the option of auto continuing to the next survey. So in the designer space that I shared previously, any icon with an arrow for the enabled as survey is an auto continue, and you can automatically continue just by checking this box, or you can add conditional logic. So for example, my example with consenting and screening, if they fit the specific screening criteria, you can add that conditional logic here, so that it only auto continues if they fit the criteria and they can enter in the initial data. However, you have a true false statement here. So if you do not want them to auto continue, they can get redirected to a URL which may or may not be a different survey, or they can just complete the survey itself. So you have multiple different options for our auto continue. Are there any questions about surveys and data form, logic, and syntax within specific fields?
There's a general question, and that
Sure.
is, can we design a project as a data form first, then turn it to a survey later?
Yes, you can absolutely do that. I would say the issue is the reverse. So if you have it as a survey, you cannot convert it back to a data form.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for logic and syntax for sorting surveys and data forms, there's two different ways that we can do this. One is a form display logic, and this changes how we view things in our record status dashboard. So for example, if we want to utilize a control group versus an experimental group or different treatments, and we only want specific surveys to show up for each of the treatments, depending on how we want to either assess or the information displayed for each treatment, we can do that. And we can clearly see from our record status dashboard which treatment each record is in. This also really helps with if we want everyone to receive the welcome survey and the thank you survey, but we want to control who is able to view what between those two surveys. So in our designer space, that top gray bar has a form display logic button, and we have three different options to edit, upload, and download our form display logic. I'm typically editing it in the browser, so I'll select edit. And when we select this edit form display logic, we get a view that looks like this. This will allow us to not only select what is available and hidden based on the conditional logic attached to attached for each event. We can also like modify this based on all events, and this is gonna be where you're gonna edit that space, even if it's not a longitudinal study that you're utilizing events. The additional optional settings that are provided on the top, I think it's really helpful to hide forms that are disabled, and that's what we're seeing on our record status dashboard, as well as we'll be able to see this when you select one participant ID on an individual space. And then if you are potentially changing the condition later on and you don't want to have any data loss, you can utilize this keep forms enabled if they contain data. You'll see this a little bit here, where treatment A has some data in these just for testing purposes, but we still retain the data even though it's not accessible on the record status dashboard. So, how this works, you don't have to just select one per condition. You can select a whole set of surveys and or data forms that are available based on one set of conditional logic. And later on in the same screenshot, you can add more and more conditions. So it's not just limited to just the one condition. The last bit is utilizing survey auto continue, making sure that our hidden forms are not auto continuing to a hidden form. And that's that. The other way of doing the survey queue, or the other way of organizing our fields, our surveys and data forms is using the survey queue. And the form display logic applies for both data forms and surveys, where the survey queue only applies for surveys. And the difference between those two as well, we can utilize data forms and surveys in form display logic, which is great. And there's no way to let your participant know this is how many forms they will be filling out. With the survey queue, it gives them a list of, hey, here's the surveys that you've completed, and here are the surveys that you have not completed. This can show up once specific surveys are completed. And then also we can add on conditional logic to this space. So it's in the same bar as in the designer space next to our form display logic, but this is specifically for survey options. And you'll get a pop-up similar to this. So additional to whatever conditional logic you can add to make sure that a survey only shows up when another survey is completed, and you can specify which one. But if you just want conditional logic, you can just check this box. And you'll see here that there's an and drop down, so this can toggle between and or as our two Boolean operators. And you can test the logic with a record, which I think is really helpful sometimes, but I would say that it's right about 50% of the time. So when you're checking on your records, make sure that you know what the correct value is supposed to be, and then you can modify your logic to make sure that it's correct. And then the last bit, because what happens with survey queue is once a survey is completed, it automatically jumps back to that survey queue, a list of all of the surveys that you need to complete. You can select auto start, so it skips over that like mini window of what the survey queue is, but the survey queue will show up on the right-hand side as they're completing it, if you choose to utilize survey queue for your study. That's a lot of information about the survey space and form display logic. Do we have any questions on that? Okay. Hearing none, I'll jump into logic and syntax for communication. There's again a couple options for this. So there's alerts and notifications and automated survey invitations. You can utilize alerts and notifications based on if you want to notify the participant or if you want to notify your REDCap users. And that is, you can coordinate that later on in the space. The focus for this particular LLC is going to be our triggering of the event, which is where our conditional logic comes into play. There's two different options on here. So conditional logic can be evaluated based on when you save a specific form or survey, so within REDCap, or when you're doing data import or data entry or time-based logic. So I would make sure that you're selecting the one that you're utilizing. So if you know that you're importing a lot of data, and you only have the record is saved on a specific form or survey, your alert may not be triggered. A peek into this, which utilizes the smart variables that we were talking about before, is utilizing piping within the conversation or the message that you're sending out. So instead of having to type out the specific survey URL for a survey, you can just use our piping smart variables or use a hyperlink here for the same purpose. For automated survey invitations, you can see those on the right-hand side of your instrument names if you've enabled it as a survey. And here's the pop-ups that you have for this. You can activate it, compose the message, which if we're doing it specifically for a particular survey, we can just use our piping values for survey link and server URL in the composition of the message. And then here's our branching logic. It's the same as our survey queue. When the following survey is completed, we can send out the invitations, and or when the following logic becomes true, and we can test this logic with a record as well. You'll see this both in alerts and notifications and automated survey invitations. to ensure logic is still true before sending invitations, this comes into play when we talk about our timing for the invitations or the alerts and notifications. So there might be, if you want someone to complete a survey and then you don't want to send them a notification until 2 weeks out and some data has changed, you want to make sure you have ensure logic is still true before sending invitation and or alerts. So that way, in case their study date has changed or something changes within those 2 weeks, they don't get an erroneous message saying like, hey, it looks like you've completed this survey, or hey, it looks like you've enrolled for this date and here's your survey. So that's what what goes into the automated survey invitations. What I think is helpful with automated survey invitations as opposed to alerts and notifications is the enable reminders to make sure that you can send the invitation multiple times to make sure that our participants have responded. Do you have any questions on communications? Okay, seeing none. I'll jump into the advanced section, which gives you more of a hands-on feel of what the branching logic and syntax is going to look like. So this is an example of multi-condition logic. If we're calculating the eligibility, we can do that within a field. And this is what our special function if statement is going to be. So if you can see here, I'll read through and translate what this branching logic is. So if age is between 18 and 65, and the BMI is between 18.5 and 40, and the consent is true, and there's like a not pregnant choice selected, then return the eligible calculation as 1, otherwise return it as 0. And we have 2 additional fields later on in the instrument talking about eligibility status, which is more of a pop-up for the researcher, which enables the branching logic for when we calculate eligible calc to equal 1, the participant is eligible for the study, but this will show up if the eligible calc equals 0 and the participant is not eligible for the study. So this allows us to take multiple different conditions and set them all up to calculate it within a field. This is another use case for branching logic and syntax, which utilizes our checkboxes. And then if we have an other option, allows a text box to pop up in that space. So for example, this question has, do you have chronic illness? And there's an other checkbox with this embedded field chronic other. This is another field in the project. And you'll see that chronic other only is shown if chronic 4 equals 1. So for example, that means if other is selected in this chronic field, then the chronic other text box will show up. So we'll see this here in the use case in the survey space. So when nothing is selected, there's no embed field next to it, and there's also no text box. When other is selected, you'll see the text box below for them to fill out exactly what chronic illness they're experiencing. And then for cascading questions in terms of our advanced section, we're utilizing that same eligible calculation field. When eligible calculation equals 1, we have the option to enroll the participant. And then once enrolled participant is filled out, and if they are being enrolled, then we can open the enrollment date. So the branching logic here looks like eligible calc calculates hopefully equals 1 if they fulfill the requirements. And then once enrolled participant has been filled out, we still check to make sure that the eligible calculation is 1 and the enroll also equals 1. On this point, though, instead of having the branching logic calculation be in this separate field, we can embed this into our branching logic. and you just use this as opposed to having an additional field, but it's hard if you want to copy paste this in this branching logic space and this branching logic space. So it's much easier to have it in one space, but I think the cool part about REDCap is that you can do things a bunch of different ways and still get the same result. So it's just, again, a matter of your design workflow for your project and what you are most comfortable with. So, are there any questions on any of the topics that I've covered? And then I know that it's not listed on here, but you can also ask questions about the advanced section as well. Okay. I will say that what I mentioned before here in terms of you can do things in REDCap a bunch of different ways. We would love to hear about your creative solutions that you found for your project. It can be as simple or complex as an example like this. We just want to showcase all the different ways that you can utilize REDCap, and it may not be ones that the REDCap admin team has come up with before. So definitely feel free to share. And thank you so much for letting me present.
Thanks, Marceline. That was an awesome presentation. I think that some of the points you raised where there's more than one way to present your questions, your surveys, your forms by embedding things within the branching logic versus having your own little calculated field. And these are great notes that I hope everybody is taking in. These are the kind of examples that we're looking for folks that might want to present moving forward, with our colleagues. And let's see what I've got. Um, Also, sorry, my apologies. I did want to ask if there's any other questions about the presentation or REDCap in general. I'll pause a moment. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Um, Certainly, if it's something in general as far as REDCap versus something specific to your project, we'd love to have you ask a question, raise your hand, or put the text in and chat, the question in chat. And always, you can always send email to redcap@fsu.edu if you think about something after this meeting. Um, no hands up, Alex?
Don't
All
see
righty.
any.
Okay, great. So I did want to review these links. They've been mentioned throughout the presentation today and presentation in the past. I think that Alex or Casey has put that in this in the chat. Simi will also be sending it out in our email after this meeting. But just want to remind you the different types of helpful links that we are offering up. We always ask if someone would like to present with us. But if you have a user request, again, we got the QR code and the URL. Technical support is the REDCap portal. Vanderbilt helpful tutorials was in this link, obviously in this QR code. The self-paced, self-guiding Canvas course that is always helpful that one of our former colleagues put together. And then, of course, all of our slides and notes and perhaps recordings are stored at this location. If you missed one or you know that you're going through your email invites that you realized there was a meeting that you missed or could have shown up at, could not have shown up at, that you can go back and get that information from this QR code or this URL. Just want to remind everybody, just in case, just sort of give you a heads up, if you would just take note of what's coming up in future presentations, as well as share with your colleagues if there's some area that may be helpful. In May, we're going to do use cases in REDCap. And in June, we're going to do creative uses of REDCap or projects. In July, we're going to talk about action tags in greater detail. In August, We're going to do intro to REDCap again because in August, September timeframe, we have new interns and students that come in, and they may know REDCap, but we just do a refresher course. And for those that maybe know REDCap, but they haven't been working on a project in a good while, they might want to attend that refresher course as well. And in September, we're going to talk about using the calculation, the example, for example, what Marcelina used, where they had that big if in the calculated field, and they can even get bigger than that. And they're actually kind of fun. It's like a Rubik's cube, trying to solve it and get it to work. Almost you get feel like a victory lap, that you've accomplished it. But it's kind of neat if you're kind of geeky like me. Anyway, do want to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you for taking time out to join us and allowing us to share ideas and presenting information about REDCap. Our next meeting is Wednesday, May 27th, a month from now, at 12:30. I think I know who the presenter is, but I'll keep that as a secret. As I put this slide together before, I knew who it was. But the topic is going to be creative uses of REDCap, as I mentioned in the future slide previously. And with that, if nobody has any other questions, we will adjourn and appreciate the opportunity to share with you during your lunch hour. And you all have a blessed day, I hope. Thank you.